Hey everyone, this is Jaime Alejandro, and you're listening to the Arts Calling podcast, the place where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. We have a great conversation in store, but before we get to it, I'd like to remind you to please stop by the shout-out link in the episode description. Every week, we have a brand new project from a previous guest of the podcast, friends of the show, and just all around interesting things going on in the independent world of literature, the visual arts, and the performing arts. So there's a lot of fun stuff to discover there. Do yourself a favor and check out some new independent work. Okay, that's out of the way. Now let me tell you about our guest. Today, I'm delighted to be Arts Calling CJ Spataro. CJ is the director of the MFA in Creative Writing and MA in Publishing programs at Rosemont College in suburban Philadelphia. She was also one of the founding partners of Philadelphia Stories magazine and PS Books. Her debut novel, More Strange Than True, is now on sale. For more information, please visit cjspataro.com. Now, I gotta say, I love this conversation with CJ. We had such a blast talking about not only short story writing, which is one of her strengths and one of the things that she's worked on for a while, but about her latest novel, More Strange Than True. It can be best described as a mashup of literary fiction and grounded fantasy in the vein of Alice Hoffman's Practical Magic or Erin Morgenstern's The Night Circus. And there's lots of Shakespeare. The novel, of course, takes some of its characters and its title from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and other characters are pulled from Greek mythology and Goethe's poem, The Elf King. We cover a lot of fun stuff, so I hope you join us. Now, without further delay, let's give CJ a call. Good afternoon, CJ. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jaime.
Yes, it's such a pleasure to get to meet you and talk to you after we've been trying to figure this out for a while. So thanks so much for joining me. I want to have some time as well to talk about More Strange Than True, which is your latest work that just came out about a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, right?
Couple of weeks, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. June 24th was the official pub date. So
there you
yeah,
go.
It's been
Okay.
almost a month. Yeah.
I'm really excited to ask you about the reception and the things that you're hearing, but I'm going to backtrack, maybe build a little bit of anticipation here, but I'd like to ask you a little bit about your beginnings as a writer, because you have such a complex series of journeys that you've taken, in particular, the musical journey that you've taken, and you're also an educator. So maybe we could backtrack to the very beginning and get a sense of how you make your way into the arts, which seem to be a very potent energy in your life.
Yeah, that's a very thanks for putting it that way. It has been a kind of a twisty journey, but one that has felt perfectly natural to me in many ways. So my parents were both very involved in the theater, and my father in particular was the director of a community college theater program for many, many years. And so my brother and sister and I, we all sort of grew up in this environment. And it just was a very creative and fertile sort of playground for kids. And I think for me in particular, always really kind of had a passion for storytelling. But I also had a passion for music. And so I did both of these things kind of on parallel tracks until I went to college. And at that time, I sort of decided that if I had a shot at actually being really good at either one, I probably need to pick something and focus on that. And so that's what I did. And I decided to focus on music. Interestingly enough, I went to college as a French horn major, and then the end of my freshman year, I switched to voice. So it wasn't just music and writing. It was also between, instrumental music and vocal music. So that's kind of where I was for a long time. But I also knew that, trying to be a performer, especially as a soprano, was going to be very difficult. And I kind of knew that if I wasn't really getting the kind of roles, or if I wasn't getting cast and on a regular basis by the time I was in my early 30s, it probably wasn't going to happen. And I was also pretty miserable, not going to lie. Um, I realized that maybe I wasn't pursuing this for the right reasons. But I also knew that I couldn't just abandon an artistic life. Like the thought of just like getting a job and never doing anything artistic again just was more than I could bear. And so I sort of found my way back to writing, which is something I had been doing since I was very, very young. And it just kind of went from there. So, eventually got into a writers group, and then I got my MFA, and I always thought that I would want to teach. So that's why I decided to go back and get an MFA so that I could teach college. And luckily, I live in a city in an area that has over 100 colleges and universities. So finding work as a adjunct teaching English is not that difficult. At least it wasn't when I started doing it. So it's not really a job I would recommend, but I didn't hate it, and actually got quite a lot out of it. So that's kind of my journey. That's kind of how I ended up where I am. And just so I kind of came to writing seriously, fairly late in life. I didn't get my MFA till I was in my early 40s. And so, and I probably hadn't published my first creative piece, I don't know, a few years before that, maybe in my late 30s. I published a few short stories before I started my MFA. And I did want to win a grant, not long before I started my MFA. But yeah, it was like, it's been, and not unusual. I think other people probably are on this journey, but definitely not the typical, oh, I got a bachelor's degree in English lit, and then I got an MFA, and then you know what I mean? That wasn't my story at all.
Sure.
So
Yeah, and it's fascinating to hear because I think at a certain age, all of us get to this point where we start shedding the things that we thought we were going to do, or at least the direction that we were going for. And then there's sort of like the true north within us that says, okay, now we're intending to go in this direction because it was the right one all along. But there was an interest, it seems, early on in short work, right? Like short fiction. Could you
mhm.
elaborate a little bit
Yeah.
about what drew you to it, or at least, how that became a good playing field, for you? Because it seemed like you were able to be very prolific in that arena once you started going in that direction, right? You started getting a lot of short stories out.
Yeah, I love short stories. I'm kind of like I will say like Annie Prue. There's this really interesting documentary about her, and that was filmed when she was writing that old Ace in the Hole, which I
Mhm.
think was her last novel. And at one point, she's like sitting in her driveway and she's super frustrated. And I just love her. She's like a cranky old woman, and that's who I want to. I probably already am, according to many people. But anyway, she's like sitting in her driveway and she's just like, if I never have to write another damn novel again in my life, that'll be the best. She's just like, just really unhappy. So, I mean, I don't know that I hate writing novels as much as she does, or at least at that point in the documentary she was talking about. But I do love short stories, and long short stories is kind of my favorite thing. Of course, that is probably the hardest thing to get published. So, um, although I've had a few long short stories published, I just sort of love being able to dig in and write something that's, between 7,500 and like 12,000 words. But also, so you have the compression of like a short story form, but you also have a little more room to expand and really make the characters fully, fully formed. I do love that a lot. And I just think it comes from like a natural instinct to want to tell stories.
Sure. Is there what are, I guess, the learning moments that you've had while writing fiction that you feel sort of like strengthened that maybe you were lacking before, you properly tackled that form? Because I think, it is kind of underappreciated in some sense, but in terms of the mechanics of things and working out that structure. What were those some things that helped you as you kept writing more and more short stories, or things that you felt were beneficial to you as a, I guess,
Yeah.
as a craft?
Yeah, and that's interesting because I I am definitely a pantser. And for people who don't know what that means I normally just have an idea or some characters or an image. It could be anything really, and sit down and just kind of start writing, figuring it out as I go without really having much of a plan. Definitely don't outline ahead of time, generally speaking. Definitely don't do that with short stories. I would say that probably, it was about halfway through my MFA program, and I just had this revelation that I could do more than I thought I could. And I'm not really sure exactly. I think it was just, I was reading a lot. I was really focused on my work for the first time in my life in a kind of very concentrated, regular way. And, um, I think if I say young writer, what I mean is like an early writer, a person that's kind of early in their writing journey, depending, it could be any age really. Um, I had really internalized a lot of things that weren't necessarily super helpful, but I understand why people say these things all the time, especially now that I've been teaching for so long. But, things like write what you know, and, um, you know, stay close to home and all these other things. And it was kind of like once I felt like I had permission to push beyond the boundaries of myself and really just kind of go for it, that really had nothing to lose, right? Because you can always change things. And if it fails, right? Who cares? So that's when I really started to write things that I was really proud of, I think, for the most part. And I just, I thought a lot about structure, and I think a lot about character development, and I constantly playing a game of what if in my head, right? So if it's the outcome, what is it going to take to, what kind of things would develop in order to make that outcome happen, for these particular characters in this particular situation. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I answered your
No,
question or not,
that's
but
perfect because I think, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I think there's a moment where you don't necessarily outgrow the short story form or anything, but it's kind of a well that allows you to explore some things, and maybe you learn something about yourself, what you're afraid to pursue, what you're afraid to develop technically. And it might be a good opportunity to talk about More Strange Than True now, because from what I gather,
Mhm,
it was an opportunity to go beyond the form of short story, right? Like you had begun
mhm.
the novel as a short story, is that right?
Not this particular novel, but because I have written other novels. This is just the first one that I've gotten published. So, I think everybody has a few novels in their drawer, that probably will remain in the drawer, the metaphorical drawer. Um, I was working on a collection of short stories. I'm always working on a collection of short stories because that's just kind of my fallback. So, like when I get stuck or I need to take a break from a bigger work, then I'll go write a short story. So, I had this idea about a woman. I just had been sort of like thinking a little bit about my time, my early days in Philly, and I was a little lonely and, struggling with decisions like, should I try to really be a singer? Is this what I really want to do? And all this kind of stuff. And I had a dog, a rescue dog at the time, and I remember kind of thinking, um, oh, why can't I find people like you that like love me and, it, are loyal and aren't judging me, and and I just kind of that, and it was just kind of one of those what if scenarios. It was like, well, what if, you know
Hmm.
a character had a dog and she was having a terrible day and she makes this wish and then somehow the dog gets turned into a man. Like, how would that happen? What would
Mm.
need to, and it started spooling out and I thought, yeah, this is going to be way too big of an idea for a short story. So usually I have to try to write the short story first before I figured that out. But this I actually kind of realized before I even started the story, even though it like the premise was super small, I felt like what was going to come out of that premise was going to be huge. So that's how I ended up. I kind of had some other projects I needed to finish, and then I sat down and started working on the book. Doing some research on dogs and fairies and different things to kind of get myself some background to get ready to write. So
And one of the big takeaways, and now I'm sort of starting to put some pieces together here about the journey of the story, but it does feel like a really awesome sort of distillation of the things that you love. I remember you mentioning in another interview that because of your musical background, a lot of these elements of mythology, in particular, maybe your background in opera, helped you sort of
Mhm.
find some of those pieces. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on how this melting pot of ideas started to solidify, because just having talked to you for like 10, 15 minutes now, it does feel like this particular story is a great vehicle for so many things that you wanted to talk about. Maybe you could share a bit about those ingredients and how they fit into this novel.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel so lucky. I mean, I think a lot of people in my situation might feel like, oh, what a waste, right? I spent 6 years in college studying music, and then, I spent another 10 years trying to be a performer and never could get my career off the ground. Like, oh, I'm so disappointed. What a waste. And I am grateful every day for that education that I got. It's just amazing. And maybe it's because where I went to school and the kind of professors I had and the kind of
Mhm.
classes that I chose to take. But I had such an amazing foundation in literature and art, uh, just through different classes, music classes that I took, because everything is so tied together. And especially with opera, it's the one performing art form where all the elements come together, right? You have singing, you have an orchestra, you have dance, you have costuming and art and all these other things. So it all comes together, and opera itself is like a very adaptive form, and it's very dependent and sort of arose out of earlier musical forms, which I won't bore your listeners with, but because I could go on and on. But so for instance, specifically in More Strange Than True. So I was familiar with the fairies from A Midsummer Night's Dream, and when I decided that that using fairies would be kind of a fun thing to do, to have for the magic piece of the story. I wasn't really sure. And one thing that had kind of kept me from writing speculative fiction for a long time was world building. So I decided to just borrow a lot of stuff from Shakespeare. Like, why not? Shakespeare did it.
Can't go
So
wrong.
I borrow from him, borrow from the great borrower. But then when I got stuck, I got stuck towards the climax of the book and I wasn't sure what to do. I felt like there needed to be some kind of turn
Mm.
for Oberon, the main character. There needed to be something sort of underneath everything that had been happening. And I just couldn't quite figure out what it should be. And for some reason, maybe I was listening to some German romantic music because I listen to different kinds of music depending on whether I'm writing or revising or whatever. And for this particular book, I listened to a lot of German romantic music while I was writing. And I guess it just got me thinking about this song by Schubert called Der Erlkönig. Oh, my German is terrible right now. The Earl King, or the Elf King is a translation. And it's just like, it's a poem by Goethe, and it's set to this It's just thrilling, and anybody that's heard it will always remember it and want to talk about it, because it's the kind of song that will give you chills even if you don't speak German, you don't know what's going on. So I just kind of listened to the song, and I pulled up a translation, and I thought, oh, I could do this, because I had sort of found some stuff in my research where Oberon, so Titania is a character that Shakespeare borrowed from Celtic mythology. Like, she appears as the Queen of the Fairies in a lot of things, like Spenser's the Fairy Queen, which again is something I know only because I studied music. Um, and and Oberon, turns out, is also a character from Norse mythology, and with a different, the name is spelled slightly differently. So it started, like the wheels started turning, and I thought, well, this is my jump the shark moment. It's either going to really work or it's going to really fall on its face, but I have to try something. So I just went for it, and all of a sudden everything just clicked in. And I was at a writing retreat at the time, and I just kept writing and writing and writing. I'm not sure if I wrote all the way to the end of the book that weekend, but probably if I didn't, I came pretty doggone close. So it just really helped. So that's a very long answer to your question.
No, this is perfect, because I think before we move forward, because you just touched on something that I want to ask you here in a bit. Can we set up a little bit of the beginning of More Strange Than True? Because I think it might give us a bit more context. And I want to kind of get into something that you just mentioned that you reminded me. But tell us about Jewell. Tell us about where we find her at the beginning and what it is that she's longing for in relation to the novel, because you kind of touched on it at the beginning. Just set us up what Jewell's dream is and how we get into that.
Yeah, so the novel opens, and it's the day of the memorial service for Jewell's father. He's been gone for a while, but they, were waiting to have a memorial service for him. He was a jazz musician, and she lost her backstory is she lost her mother when she was a child, and she and her father were very close, and her father passed away about 6 months before the opening of the book, but they were having a memorial service for him where all of his friends were coming together in this really historic church up in North Philly for a service for him. And the service is over, and they're sitting in a restaurant called Puck's Place, which is owned by Jewell's best friend's boyfriend, Bobby Fellows. And while they're sitting there, they're waiting for Jewell's boyfriend to show up, and he sends her this really awful text and breaks up with her. And so she's just kind of done. She's just one of those days where it's like, I'm really sad, and now my boyfriend has turned out to be a total jerk. I'm gonna just go home and spend some time with my dog, who is not gonna make me feel bad. So they pack up some food for her from the restaurant. She takes it home, and first thing she does is she takes her dog for a walk. And while she's at the dog park, she meets a guy named Steve, and they have kind of an awkward encounter. But he's a very nice guy. And then she's really done. She goes home and she eats this dinner, and she gets a little drunk. And, she looks at her dog and is just like, why can't I find someone like you in my life? And kind of jokes a little bit. And then something happens. She starts quoting some lines from Midsummer Night's Dream. She's an engineer by trade, but loves reading and music. And I will say my sister is an environmental engineer who also loves reading and music. So I kind of borrowed some of those characteristics from my sister. And then after she goes to bed, these fairies show up and turn her dog into a man. And she's named her dog Oberon. That's that's why she's thinking about Midsummer Night's Dream. So that's the opening of the book. So
excellent. And I think, it leads me to ask you about the difficulty of adapting something as complicated and silly and ridiculous as A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a brilliant play, but at the same time, there's so much going on. There's so many spinning plates. I feel that you were able to translate that in your own way to this scenario, but it's not a one-to-one adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. So I'm hoping that maybe you could help me figure out how you were able to use the play as a starting point and then start imbuing some of these other references, because I think it is not a Shakespeare play. It is you very much in this lived in way. And I do want to talk about the realism of it too, but maybe we can get to that in just a moment. But just the difficulty of managing adaptation, and when does it stop being adaptation and when does it become something
Yeah.
that is more you than just copy and paste, because it's clearly not what happened. It is very much you.
Yeah, I love adaptation, and I have done it several times. Some really specifically, and some really specific adaptations. Like I have an early novel that's an adaptation of The Marriage of Figaro, set in a singing waiter restaurant in South Philly, and it's probably the closest thing to my real life that I've ever written. But it's a pretty one. That had its own challenges, but um, I in this case, I just, I read before I sat down and started writing, I reread Midsummer a couple times. And I read, I have like the Harold Bloom Invention of the Human, which is this, book of essays about Shakespeare, and and I read some other stuff, and I the plot is ridiculous. So I didn't think I would be able to like successfully do that. And I kind of wasn't interested in all the mistaken identity and all that kind of stuff. What really interested me was the dynamic between Puck, Titania, and Oberon. And the secondary fairies. I thought I could use some of them as initially as background characters, and then Peas Blossom kind of comes to the front a little bit. I also wanted it to be a female forward book. I feel very strongly about having strong three-dimensional female characters in my work, and I want them to have positive relationships with people. Friendships, female friendships are so important. But also, if they're, the romantic relationships, whether they're, whatever they are. I want to kind of portray it in a positive way if I can. So, in this case, I wanted Titania to have some sisters. And I thought two sisters would be good. And there weren't any sisters for her in Midsummer, so I had to find some fairies somewhere else. So I leaned on my opera and my musical theater background, and I thought of Ondine, who is a fairy from like French mythology. I think, and then she technically is a water nymph, but it depends on like how what kind of version of this you're looking at. And then the same with, I say Iolanthe because that's how they say it in Gilbert and Sullivan. Although I had one interviewer pronounce it Yolanthe, and I think she's probably correct. I have a feeling, the British, they like to just say things however they feel like saying things. So it's probably better pronounced Yolanthe. And she's from Greek mythology. But actually, I was really thinking about the Gilbert and Sullivan adaptation of her story, which is again silly and ridiculous. So I just wanted to borrow those characters and kind of take some of their characteristics. So like Ondine is supposed to be kind of the more thoughtful, more sensitive one. And Iolanthe is supposed to be sort of more practical, kind of determined one. And they both support Titania in their own way. And together they, have a great sisterly relationship, I think. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the great successes of the novel, I think, is the fact that even though you have these very absurd premises taking place and the situations are fairly out of the norm and very much rooted in fantasy, I don't know how you're able to do this hard realism that exists in, setting the place in Philadelphia, having these very humane, very empathetic kind of relationships happening, as you mentioned, with the sisters and with Jewell. The relationships in the core of this story work on a very real, fundamental level. And then you have this other layer that is just madness, that is so at odds with it, that I love the dissonance. I love that kind of tension that you've created with these things, but they fit. They definitely work. And so I'm curious how you negotiate the logic of this piece. How did you find that balance? Because if it were just a little bit to one direction, it probably wouldn't have worked as well as it did. And I think you did that so wonderfully. Can you tell me how you arrived at those rules, or were there parameters between realism and fantasy that you had to figure out before you started, or did they reveal themselves to you?
Yeah, I would. Well, first of all, thank you for those kind comments. I really appreciate it. I definitely, these are definitely things I figured out along the way. And I think because my early grounding is in literary fiction, and I read a lot of literary fiction, and in the MFA program that I run, I teach a lot of classes, and a lot of students come in and they want to write epic fantasy, right? They're all into like sword and sorcerer and Lord of the Rings type stuff. And I make them read literary fiction because they need to, right? So, for me, whether I'm reading science fiction, which I also love, um, um, contemporary fantasy, or literary fiction, realistic literary fiction, doesn't really matter. My primary interest is always in the characters. And so, I want to be able to feel like I know the people in the story. And by the time I'm finished with something, I always feel like I could go out to lunch with Jewell and we could go to Puck. I wish Puck's Place was a real restaurant, frankly, um, uh, but, you know, these things were really important to me. So I figured like, and it was really important to me also that Titania not be this kind of Cruella de Vil, Maleficent kind of caricature. Like, she was super fun to write because she's very bitchy. And, it's fun to write characters like that because, they get to act in ways that most people don't, aren't able to really get away with. And the fact that she's magical and she can do things right. So that was super fun to write. But I wanted her to be a real person. Like, I wanted there to be like a real push and pull between her and Jewell, and a sense of them both really ultimately wanting to do the right thing, but neither one of them is really sure what that is or what the outcome will be. So I think that's kind of what I let guide me. And I will say that as I revised, I had to kind of tone down some things. I love to lean on humor, and sometimes I can punch things too hard. And so I kind of had to pull some stuff back, but the story's better for it, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that work clearly shows. If I may ask a question about craft, and I've been kind of like throwing these things at you the whole conversation, but if you can pinpoint maybe one of the hardest things that you had to do as you were reworking this manuscript, what was something that you just kind of agonized over, that you felt you just couldn't reach a solution, and then you sort of crafted your way out of it? Was there anything like that where there was something that felt insurmountable that you ultimately ended up overcoming?
yeah, it really was that climax
Mm,
when I found went back to the Elf King poem by Goethe.
right.
I was sitting in this cabin up in the Poconos, staring at my computer going, okay, what now? Like, literally. And I rarely find myself in a position like that. I like just really didn't know what to do. So that was really hard. And then, once I kind of struck on this idea, I did a little more research, dug around a little bit, and then just sat down and started writing. And I thought, well, I'll just now that I have this idea, I need to just kind of run with it. And I was trying to think of, at one point I almost wrote like a separate document. I started it, but I realized I didn't need to finish it. But I did start like a legend of the Elf King, like that I was going to write
Mm.
separately as a separate document. Um, so that needed some revision. I needed to have the story of the Elf King make sense in the context of the novel. And I needed those pieces of what was going on to fit with the beginning. So that did take some work, and I had to kind of structurally go back and like look at earlier things, and again also with the magic, because I've written things. I have a whole collection of speculative short stories, but this was really the first piece of what I would consider, contemporary fantasy. Was not really a genre that I had written in before, and so making sure the rules of the magic were consistent, like that was really key for me. And because that is a thing that readers of fantasy, if you screw that up, they will catch it and they will be annoyed. So, I have a good friend who writes a lot of fantasy and horror, and he, he's the one who kind of like drilled that into my head. It's like the rules of
Mm.
the magic have to be consistent, right? So, the rules of the world. And I've read enough student manuscripts where I can see where things are, kind of inconsistent and falling apart. And it's like, okay, you gotta go back and fix this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I always marvel at that educator's ability. You constantly have just a flow of story coming at you from students that I'm sure over time you start to recognize those patterns. It baffles me, like all the educators I talk to about that. That's pretty great.
Yeah, I think we have a novel writing track at Rosemont. And so I, over the course of the years, even before I was the program director, I taught the novel workshop, which is a class where students get to workshop an entire draft of a novel, which is kind of unusual. And I probably have read, I don't know, in the last, so I stopped teaching it two years ago. So over 12 years, probably 100 student
Oh
novels,
man,
so
you're a
yeah,
machine.
in all, yeah, all various shapes. And one of the longest books I read was like a 140,000 word
Oh man.
epic fantasy novels that the student had started when he was 13.
Oh yeah.
So, like, the beginning of the book was completely almost unreadable. And then, because he wrote it when he was 13. And then the end of the book, which he wrote when he was in graduate school, was amazing. So that was kind of a crazy ride reading that book.
Wow.
Um, yeah. So, yeah, I've read some really long books. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna
But
lie.
nonetheless, I'm sure it's incredibly rewarding to see that progress. I mean to really understand a student's journey. I don't know how like of course, there's so many teachers who become jaded, but you don't strike me as somebody who has just kind of like thrown their hands in the air. I think there's still kind of a charm to seeing somebody develop, in that way, especially with that huge of a comparison, between when they started and when they wrapped it up.
Yeah, I love teaching, and I get a lot of energy from my students, and I think it's really my students that kind of gave me the courage, I will say, to try writing fantasy and science fiction, speculative fiction in general, because so many of them were writing it and they
Mhm.
just weren't like really worried about it. And I always really worried about it. I was like, oh, because I love it, I love it, but I was really afraid to try for some reason. I guess because I was a middle aged woman and there aren't a lot of people like me writing fantasy and science fiction. And I worried about it. And I wasn't really necessarily interested in writing traditional fantasy and science fiction. I was much more interested in writing what might be called speculative fiction, which is kind of more of a mashup of literary fiction, incorporating, elements. Could be horror, could be magic realism, it could be science fiction, it could be fantasy. It's just very inspired by some writers out there, and just wanted to. I finally and my students, and just thought, well, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
So.
And it is an incredibly bold work that you've written. I really enjoyed not only the tone of the whole piece, but just the fact that it is something that is, I don't know, catered to like a theater person who doesn't seem to have any qualms with form. It's just like, let's just go and try whatever is possible. And I think a lot of your background on that shows, but maybe you could educate me on this, because I'm not sure what the climate is right now between, say, the literary world and this perhaps looking down on speculative fantasy and these kinds of forms. Is that even a conversation to be concerned about? Because I'm not an academic, so I'm not sure sort of what the pulse of that conversation is. Do you feel that there is sort of like this feeling from the literary world to keep that kind of those kinds of forms at arm's length? Or, is that really not something that is as big as people in the genre world would like us to think?
Well, it's not as big a thing as it used to be. It does still exist, I would say, to a certain extent. But for most readers, it has no meaning. It really is kind of an academic thing. And as far as MFA programs go, there are still MFA programs out there that won't allow students to write anything but realistic literary fiction. That's just, okay, for them. The truth of the matter is, I think more students are interested in writing things other than that. And so with the push for enrollment being so tight, and just sort of the state of higher education in general, people are really competing for students now, that I think a lot of MFA programs have kind of changed their tune, because otherwise they've had a very difficult time recruiting students. And I still have students who just write realistic literary fiction, and that's great, And there are programs out there where people just write speculative fiction, or they just write, children's lit. Our most successful alumni actually are all middle grade writers, young adult authors. So we have a lot of students who are writing that, and that the YA market right now is really soft, from what I understand. Really oversold, because everybody was like, just, the market's super oversaturated. I think it's really hard to sell a YA novel at the moment. I'm sure that will ease up, but right now that seems to be what's going on. I think the conversation, especially because of authors like Kelly Link and Carmen Maria Machado, who actually taught at Rosemont for a while, and authors, Karen Russell, female identifying authors that are working in this very complex sort of literary speculative world. And then other authors like N.K. Jemisin and Ted Chiang, who are just really writing, exquisite kinds of, the prose itself is just breathtaking. And I think there's always been an element of this kind of literary stuff. I sometimes teach a short story seminar where we read collections of short stories, and I always start with Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. And most of the students haven't really read any Ray Bradbury, and they're like blown away. They're like, oh my God, this is really good. I'm like, yeah, it is really good. And like these images, these stories, they're like, will rip your heart out. So that's the kind of stuff that I kind of go back to. And I think those authors are kind of changing the conversation about that kind of stuff. And, there's lots of them out there, Stephen Graham Jones and Victor LaValle. There's a lot out there doing this kind of work, which is super exciting. Like, it's really great.
I thank you for indulging me in that, because it is kind of it could be a can of worms, and there's a lot of conversations in there that we could have, not just about that sort of divide, whether it's imagined or not, but also about the educational sort of gaps that we start to seeing, or perhaps, folks at higher education or institutions having to find ways to bring more people in. I would love to talk to you about that all day, but I only have two questions, to be mindful of your time here. But this has been such a blast, and I hope that we get to chat down the road, because I love the way you write. I love your
Oh, thank
voice, and
you.
it was such a delight to read your work.
Oh,
But
thank you so much.
yeah, no
Yeah.
problem. So the questions that I have here are kind of selfish ones. Number one, if you could share with me perhaps some inspirations that you've had recently, like what's some work out there that has sparked your creative engine to kind of come back to life, whether it's doesn't have to be literary fiction, doesn't have to be fiction of any kind, it could be music or movies, a show, any other kind of visual art, whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, and this people will either love this or they will be like, okay, she's off her rocker. But I love Murderbot. Like, I have read all of the Murderbot novellas. They are awesome. And I just like want to write robot stories now. So just, I love Martha Wells. Those I every time a new one comes out, I'm like buying it right away and reading it. Um, the voice is so captivating, and they're so fun. I really, really enjoy those Murderbot books. I read a lot. So, and I read a lot of different kinds of things. I just had an article come out on electric literature. And so I was reading books set in Philly, and went back to read some books that I had read before, and like, picked out some new books. And I know this is also going to sound crazy, but I really love the Silver Linings Playbook. I love the movie, but then when I read the book, um, and I understand like when they adapted the movie, why they changed the things they changed from the novel. But the novel was just really kind of wonderful in its own kind of way. And I just really appreciated the writing in that book a lot as well. And I would say maybe R.O. Kwan, Yellowface, I read last year. There's a couple of other authors, like, Mona Awad. She wrote like Bunny and All's Well, which is her own sort of Shakespeare. They're fantastic. And Bunny is like this just takedown of MFA programs, where there's magic involved and the students literally are killing their darlings. So it's just,
Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing at that, but it's a great image.
oh, it's so dark and so funny. And I think some people, they didn't like it because they didn't really understand like what she was doing, but it's a little graphic, but it's fantastic.
Well, I'll be sure to read that one for sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been inspired by all kinds of things, to be honest with you. I get stuck on music. I listen to, I've had songs stick in my head and that I've ended up writing stories about, or, just all kinds of things. The new book that I'm trying to sell right now is very much inspired by Japanese kaiju and
Mm.
like the monster movies in that were made in the United States, that in like movies like them, or The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, things like that. I love those kind of movies too.
Oh, that's
Like,
awesome.
I just watched Godzilla -1,
Oh
and
my
it is
goodness.
genius.
That movie
So good.
tore my heart out and stomped on it. It was such a remarkable movie. I was not expecting that either. I was just wanting to go in for the action, but the metaphor, the use of the world to say what they wanted to say
Mhm.
was breathtaking to me. That's a really good
It
one.
was amazing.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I will say this, like I could talk about Godzilla for an hour, but we don't have time for that.
that's the
So,
next episode. Let's save it for the next episode, but that's a
okay.
great idea. The last question, of course, is very selfish of me, but I have been on this kick ever since COVID to find out what resonates with people about their life in terms of what it means to lead a life well lived. I'm sort of obsessed with that question now because everyone's answers are so different, but yet there is a core couple of things that keep coming up. So I'm curious how you have gone about figuring out what a life well lived means. So what keeps you sort of centered? What keeps you full of fulfillment in your day to day? It doesn't have to be as an artist. It can be as a human being. What are the things that keep you going?
That that is a really hard question, to be honest. And I've had some things happen in the last year that have really affected how I answer that question. So I lost my brother to pancreatic cancer last year,
Mm,
and my husband was recently diagnosed with cancer. So we're going through that personally. And these things happened like right on top of my book deal. So I've been
mm,
trying, I just turned 62. I've been trying for 20 plus years to get a book published. So the day after I signed my contract, my brother called to tell me about his diagnosis.
oh
The day
no.
after I got my author copies, my husband was diagnosed. So like these things are
Oh,
like on top of each other, and like this feeling of incredible joy because of my personal success and finally achieving something that I've worked so hard for. I feel like I could be the poster child for resiliency. I think I just keep pushing. That's just who I am. But then also having to balance this grief and sorrow and terror, when I'm thinking about my husband, and what may or may not happen in the future. We're early into this, has been the biggest challenge of my life, really. Like giving myself permission to feel joy and happiness and be able to celebrate, but then also having these moments where I just want to sit in a corner and cry. Um, or sometimes for no good reason, sometimes for very good reasons. So, um, as far as like, I think, at one time I thought, oh, I'm gonna work for, until I'm in my 70s. I'm gonna do this. I have decided that is not the case. That as much as I love teaching, when I am able to retire, I am 100% going to do it and just spend my time with the people I love and working on my writing. Like these are the things that really bring me joy and make me feel whole as a person. And if I don't have any money to buy groceries, well, that's the way it goes. I just, at this point, it's like I literally, life is too short. And I want to make the most of the time I have left, whether that's a day or, you know, 20 years, hopefully. It's, that's what's really just hit home to me. And I'm sorry that it really took my brother's untimely death to kind of really hit me over the head with a sledgehammer, about it. So, and I think it happens to a lot of people. But yeah, that's how I would answer that question, or better or worse. Yeah.
well, CJ, I want to thank you for sharing that with me, and of course, I'm sending my love and strength to you folks over there, and I'll be thinking of your husband. But at this time, I also want to thank you for showing us how to take risks in the writing, for showing me and reminding me that it's okay to swing for the fences and to be bold and to persist and be stronger than you think, because that is what you're displaying here, not just as a writer but as a human being. And I just had a wonderful time talking with you, so I can't thank you enough for sharing your work with me and inspiring me beyond belief, because it's a great, hilarious, ridiculous novel, and I had a great time going through it and learning about these characters. But thank you so much. This has been a blast.
It has been a blast. Thank you. I really, really appreciate your thoughtful questions. It's been wonderful.
Wonderful to hear. So I will let you enjoy the rest of your day, but I'll be in touch on the internet. And hey, maybe down the road we'll talk about the educational system, about Godzilla, about more writing, and all kinds of theater too. I'm down for that. But yeah, maybe next time.
That would be awesome.
All right,
Thank
CJ.
you so much, Ivan.
Take care. Talk soon.
Okay.